So
what is, you use the term Terry and Terry law. Some people out there might not really understand what that means.
Yes, well, many years ago, and certainly before my time, I'm not quite that old, but the Supreme Court in about 1961 gave us the case of Terry versus Ohio. And in that case, they expressly told law enforcement officers those circumstances in which they can encounter a citizen, hold that citizen against their will so that they can investigate that criminal activity. Prior to the Terry decision, a police officer had very few choices. They either had to encounter that person by talking to them or arrest them. They had no right to detain someone that they suspected, very well-foundedly suspected, of criminal activity to try to investigate that further. So now the officers, if they can articulate some of the things that Harold and Robert have talked about, those are indicators of criminal activity. It's not an association with the group, so to speak, that you're looking at. You're looking at the fact they are in this group, and this group has certain goals, and they accomplish those goals through certain means, and those means are criminal activity. It's a very clear-cut operation, if you will, to commit crimes for a very specific purpose.
Okay, and we realize that we can't go too deep into this, but what you're allowing us to do is think out in a different way. Think about these laws and how officers can use them to their advantage. After you've stopped and arrested a suspect, and you have enough evidence you think to bring charges against them, there are legal tactics available that can help you put them away. And we're talking about putting in not just one gang member, an entire gang away. We're talking about RICO laws. Can we go over that briefly?
Sure. Well, obviously, as police officers, they're going to have to be our frontline defenders, and they can't allow criminal activity, particularly gang activity, to go on. So they'll arrest those folks for the crimes they've committed. But I think they have to keep the big picture in mind, and that is the RICO Act. It was originally created to target organized crime, the traditional organized crime that most people, La Cosa Nostra and the mafia, if you will. But in this day and age, the gangs are just as much of a problem, if not more so, than the mafia ever was. And so what you can do is do your reactionary type stuff, as Harold had talked about, and arrest those individuals, but keep track of them and start demonstrating that, hey, we've arrested these people, yet they continue to operate as a criminal organization. And that's a good step towards the prosecution under our RICO laws. And the racketeering statutes give the officers and the prosecutors a tremendous tool to really take out an entire organization. It allows them to see what activities they're going. Candidly, if you arrest someone and they continue to commit those activities in the future, it's a very good tool to prove this ongoing criminality of that racketeering organization. So you've got to work, the police have to work with the prosecutors, identifying who these individuals are, and start building their cases, start taking the pictures, as Agent Sanchez showed us, and start documenting these folks. In this day and age with technology, you have the digital cameras that you can do the organization of these persons by facial. You can have them by name, by gang member group, and you can use that later on. It takes some time. It takes some effort. Many people are afraid to get into that bigger step, if you will, of a racketeering or a RICO prosecution, because it does take more time. It takes more time from the officer's standpoint. It takes a tremendous amount of resources from the prosecutor's office, because you have to show more that they just committed a crime. One of the other great tools is what is known as the CCE statute, or the Continuing Criminal Enterprise. It is one of those only statutes out there, other than RICO, that allows you to attack the entire organization. Now, CCE is primarily directed towards the managers or the supervisors, the people that are in charge, but you can bring the other members into that group under the CCE statute. You have to look at the assets they're deriving. One of the particular components of the statute is that the organization is gaining assets, and under federal law in many states, they have a super RICO, if you will, of CCE, where you get the real kingpins, the people who are bringing the tons and tons of drugs. Now, CCE is solely limited to drug violations, whereas racketeering, and you'll see on the screen there, can be at any kind of criminal activity. And one of the ways I like to describe this is, think of the triangle. When you've got this pyramid that you see on the screen, the enterprise, that's the showing of the association, the group. Gang members make that easy for you because they're proud to tell you, this is our organization, this is our association. You then show the pattern of activity that they're committing every day. And graphically, in this day and age, with computers, you can put things up on screens in front of juries so they get the big picture. And that's really the part of it, is you got to show the big picture, because you can't just say they did this aggravated assault or they did this drug violation. You got to show how this works up the chain. And as I understand it, and certainly in Florida, I don't think we have the same levels of gangs perhaps in some of the bigger cities, but you can definitely make an impact in your community by taking out that entire organization. There's nobody left to commit those crimes.
Okay, good. Well, we'll talk about that more in a minute in our live panel discussion. We will get back to that. But I want to let our viewers know that now that you have watched and listened and learned, now it's your turn to ask some questions. We are now opening up our phone lines for your questions. The number is on your screen. It is 1-888-870-3000. I'll repeat that, 1-888-870-3000. We are anxiously awaiting your phone calls, and for any of our experts, for legal aspect, law enforcement aspect, community aspect, whatever's on your mind, give us a call. Let's get back to the RICO laws and the CCE laws. And as a former state prosecutor, you're dealing with police all the time. The first ones on the scene, they make the arrest. They bring it to you, decide whether to go forward with charges. There's got to be some way to have a really great working relationship, because, I mean, the stacks of cases you've got to have as a state prosecutor on your desk, the stacks of paperwork you two have to do. Important to take the time to make some kind of a relationship or develop it?
Absolutely. And most of your state prosecutors, as I travel throughout the country doing the training through MCTFT, it's the same thing. The state prosecutors are swamped with files. They have a tremendous amount of numbers, if you will, but that doesn't mean you can't then take those numbers and kind of sit back and put them all together later on. Certainly, if you can get someone from the United States Attorney's Office interested in these gangs, you can take all of these state convictions, all of these state cases, and start using those to work up the chain, if you will, to make that a RICO case, which the federal government and the assistant United States attorneys, who are outstandingly qualified at those major cases, that they can put it in and they can do the 3 or the 4 month trial that it will take. And this goes from the organized crime members down to the bikers and into your regular street gangs.
Okay, great. We'll continue to talk about that, but first we'd like to point out that the awareness of the gangs problem in America is a problem that is knocking on the front door of the White House. And President Bush is hearing and responding with a call for action.
Tonight I propose a 3-year initiative to help organizations keep young people out of gangs and show young men an ideal of manhood that respects women and rejects violence. Taking on gang life will be one part of a broader outreach to at-risk youth, which involves parents and pastors, coaches and community leaders, in programs ranging from literacy to sports.
That was President Bush at his State of the Union address back in February, addressing the gangs problem. Obviously, it's getting national attention, not that it hasn't before, but enough for the President to mention it in the State of the Union address. And what he did, that we didn't hear the rest of his soundbite, but what he did was what most men would do when they need a job done and done right. They call their wife, and I'm sure that you can relate to that. So President Bush has assigned Laura Bush, our First Lady, to develop a program, or to start looking to do something that would be community-based, that could help communities come together and sort of collectively, like it takes a whole village theory, deal with this problem. How does it make you feel that the officers as officers on the front line of this problem, that our Commander-in-Chief is publicly acknowledging it?
Oh, fantastic. It makes me feel great that they're not just calling for law enforcement to get involved. They're calling for the community in which these individuals live and operate, for them to get involved, and for the churches to get involved. There has to be a rallying point outside of law enforcement. I think the community is where it should start.
And again, more tips on that in your book. So All right. Well, what we want to do now is take a look at something that happened right here in Florida near Tampa recently. There was a big crackdown on gangs that led to a drug bust and the confiscation of a cache of weapons. The sheriff pulled the community in to solve the problem.
2 more gangs. The loosely knit group of juveniles and young adults were hanging out and committing crimes in the Heather Lake subdivision and surrounding areas of Brandon. Detectives say the groups called themselves City Squad and FAM. Sheriff G's gang task force arrested 66 suspects, resulting in 176 charges, most of them drug-related.
This round of arrests isn't the first in Hillsborough County, Florida, so the new sheriff in town is trying to educate people about gangs.
I have a 13-year-old who, to my knowledge, is not involved in anything like this, but I wanted to be aware of what those symbols and tactics and methodologies are.
And parents have got to be involved with them.
Janae Newell and about 500 other people came to this town hall-style meeting to hear what's going on in their communities and how they can help.
Gangs are not totally a law enforcement problem. It's a community problem. If you don't have the community working with you, you're missing a whole lot of information.
Knowledge is the key. About 80 gangs exist in Hillsborough County, all with distinctive clothing, colors, and symbols.
I learned what to look for, what types of clothing, what types of tactics they're using, what their symbols are, so that I know what I'm looking at when I see it.
Hundreds of eyes and ears, out there helping law enforcement control the gang problem. Tiffany Sherman for MCTFT.
Another example how it's going to take many different approaches from many front lines to deal with the problem. We have our phone lines open now, and we have a phone call. We have Terry from Detroit on the line, and Terry wants to know, are terrorists really related to gangs? Harold?
Oh, absolutely. There's some statement or something out there that's saying that terrorist groups are trying to use your typical street gang. I know there are some larger street gangs that are using your younger street gang members to commit their crimes.
Okay. Well, Terry, you're on the line, I understand. Would you like to speak directly to Sergeant Rashawn?
Yes. Good afternoon, Sergeant Rashawn.
Good afternoon.
I'm from Detroit, and there's a new gang that's forming in Detroit. Well, I don't know if they're new, but it's called the Serranos on the west side. Are they here in Detroit, and are they making a stance here in Detroit?
Yes, that's the Sir 13s, the Serranos. They are in Detroit. Law enforcement has recognized them as being in Detroit, and there's a collaborative effort in the city right now to eradicate them. So they are in existence.
Okay. I have read your book. It's a good book. I think it's a must-read for parents especially. I think you're doing a good job with that book. You did a good job with the book, and keep up the good work.
Thank you.
I think he made a great point when he said he thinks the book is a great read for parents.
Yeah.
Parents need to understand that sometimes their little angel isn't, and they need to educate themselves. The internet is a world of information. They need to get on there and educate themselves and pay attention to what their kids are doing.
Okay, good.
And I would kind of agree with some of the things that Harold's talked about, where he says, it's not just law enforcement's job to fix this problem. I mean, and it is a problem. I think Agent Sanchez had said, well, the courts, they're not doing their job, and certainly the courts perhaps could be more responsive, but you're not going to cure the problems that these gangs create through the court system. That's a reactionary kind of program. You need to involve your churches. You need to involve your communities, and your parents need to be involved. If your parents are not involved with their kids, if they don't know where their kids are going, that's going to be a problem that's going to continue to fester until they do something about it.
Yeah, I know. I think we all, 4 of us, can relate to that as parents. Well, we're going to go back to Durham right now, Durham, North Carolina, and city leaders there and law enforcement there are reaching out their walls, trying to slow the gang problem, and they're reaching to the community. MCTFT correspondent Tiffany Sherman and our photographer Jim McCormick shows us how.
Driving down the streets in parts of Durham, the problem is evident. People just hanging out, doing and selling drugs, causing trouble. The police gang unit does what it can.
Arresting them whenever we can. If there's any reason to arrest someone, to go ahead and do it. And by putting this constant pressure on them, it just lets them know that they can't get away with some stuff.
But the police can't do it alone.
Really, all we as police can do is go out and try and do some prevention, but mostly we're arresting people after it's already happened. What we need the community to do is become involved with those intervention and prevention methods and keep things from happening. It's really critical that we, as a community, work together to try and create long-term change.
Change can come from something as simple as a basketball game. James Blackburn is a Project Safe Neighborhood street worker. She's also coach, mentor, and friend.
It gives the kids involved. When I met with the young guys, I said, listen, tell me why do you want to be on this team? And most of them say to the coach, we just want to do something. We just want to be part of something positive.
Each of the kids on the team is suspended from school and attending an alternative program.
Being an alternative school is almost like, they've been cast off to the side, and it's like people have turned their back on them. So I like to come in and show a little love, show a little affection, spend a little time with them and make them feel like, you are somebody. And being part of a basketball team, I think, helps these kids feel like they're part of something.
Good man.
Even though he works out of the police department, Blackburn is not a cop. He never could be. He robbed a Winston-Salem hotel back in 1987 when he was addicted to crack cocaine.
Had I not gone to prison, I'd probably be dead. Having spent a little time in prison was sort of an eye-opener to me. And once I got out, I felt like that I wanted to do all I could to try to keep young people from going there.
Photos Blackburn displays with pride show the success stories, troubled teens who found a way out. But he says starting earlier is better, and he's not the only one committed to the idea.
The goal of the program really is to change this community.
Pastor Doug Carricker spends many afternoons playing with children, but it isn't just fun and games.
What we're trying to do is work with the children, keep them away from the gang, because they were actively trying to get these younger kids to come into gangs. We're trying to get those children, help them to build their own social network so that they don't feel the need of the gang.
The kids in the Carriage House after-school program arrive around 3:30, eat a snack, play a while, learn life skills, and get help with their homework. The afternoon ends the same way each day.
And for the last 15 minutes, we do a devotional time with them where we have a little devotional booklet, basically. It's got a scripture in there. We talk about, there's usually a little story that goes along with it. We talk about that. We pray for each one of the kids, and then we let them go.
The streets of the Carriage House apartments look peaceful now, but that hasn't always been the case.
The gang members were pretty active. I mean, they were out. If you drove in here, that's the first thing that you saw was a gang of guys hanging out there. A lot of times they wouldn't get out of the way of your car and that sort of thing. They were fairly menacing and intimidating.
The gangs haven't gone away, but now the sounds of laughter are heard more than gunshots.
I guess just overall I would say this has been a great experience for everybody all around. And one thing that's important, I think, is the consistency. You can't just come in, do a one-shot thing and think that's going to be it. We've been doing this for months, and we've still got a long way to go, I think.
It's a road James Blackburn will also be on, to teach kids how to avoid the mistakes he made.
I believe that all kids are teachable, reachable, and lovable, but it's just you got to be able to have that time and patience.
And people like Blackburn and Carricker, willing to invest their time and money to make sure an entire generation of young people doesn't just disappear.